At the time the Man in the Box video came out in 1991, Sammy Hagar was the singer in Van Halen. Sammy Hagar liked the video for Man in the Box so much that he subsequently invited Alice in Chains to go on tour with Van Halen that year. The following is from Sammy Hagar. Quote, "I loved that song, Man in the Box. I said, let's get these guys to open for us. I played the video for everybody to see what they look like. Look at these guys, they're cool. Everybody said, yeah. And that's how they came out." End quote. On June 17, 1991, Van Halen released their 9th studio record for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Alice in Chains toured with Van Halen in support of that album. Although touring with Van Halen was a dream come true for the guys in Alice in Chains, the tour did not go smoothly. As a matter of fact, things were pretty rough. Jerry Cantrell even went as far as calling the opening show for Van Halen the worst gig of his life. Quote, "I remember showing up for the first gig and walking on the deck and getting ready to play the show. Eddie Van Halen was sitting there with his guitar on, running scales, and he's smiling. He came over and introduced himself. He was hanging right on the side of the stage in my little pit with my guitars and my guitar tech. Eddie's wife Valerie was with him. Wolfie was newly born and in her arms. So that's how the tour started for me, like, whoa, okay, I'm standing here and Eddie Van Halen is smiling and playing guitar and meeting me, and I'm going to go on stage in about 5 minutes. I go on to play, and he stayed there and watched me. I think it was the worst gig in my life, at least in my mind, because I was so nervous that the dude was sitting there watching me. Finally, he went back to his dressing room to get ready for his show, and I think I started to relax a little bit more. We stayed with Van Halen for a couple of legs of the tour and made really good friends with Eddie. There were a lot of late night hangs, a lot of pool halls and bars. We'd always end up in each other's rooms with a couple of guitars. When he came to town, he'd give me a call and vice versa. We also became friends with Sammy. He and I have been buds for a long time. In our band, Van Halen was always well loved and embedded in our psyches. And of course, as a guitar player, Eddie is the top of the mountain in terms of uniqueness and a commitment to excellence. There was nobody like him, and there never will be. That's just the way it's supposed to be. Now, that tour was really impactful from a career standpoint and also just an achievement level of like, wow, okay, I guess we can play with these guys. End quote. Though things worked out in the end, the tour started off rough for Alice in Chains. The main reason for this, though, was not because they were nervous, but rather because Van Halen's audience did not like Alice in Chains, at least initially. Though many people had heard Man in the Box, their big single at the time, most of Alice in Chains' other songs at the time were not very well known. For the tour with Van Halen, Alice in Chains kept Man in the Box as their closing number in their set. This meant that the other songs they opened with were virtually unknown amongst Van Halen fans. Many Van Halen fans didn't even know Alice in Chains was the band behind Man in the Box. According to Sammy Hagar, at some shows, Van Halen fans would even flip off and boo the band. He also recalls that LAYNE in particular would give back attitude to the crowd. Sammy Hagar once recalled the following to Ultimate Classic Rock. Quote, "LAYNE would squat and take his leather jacket off real calm while Jerry was soloing. He'd fold it up like a butler and lay it down real slow on the drum riser, and then he'd turn around. He'd squat down like he's taking a dump and just take his middle finger and hold it up to the audience. I thought it was hilarious. He really, really had some balls, and he sang great every night. That band was great. But the point is, I said, open with Man in the Box, you idiots. That song is a hit. The audience will go, oh, that's who these guys are. You know, nobody knew who they really were." End quote. Eventually, Alice in Chains moved Man in the Box further towards the beginning of their set. And according to Sammy Hagar, it helped immensely. In an interview with Jenny McCarthy, Sammy Hagar went further into his reasoning as to why he recruited Alice in Chains to tour with Van Halen in 1991. Quote, "When you're in Van Halen in the 90s when grunge came along, that was freaky, man. Because I'm looking at these guys and we're sort of the glam rock. We're all dressed up and dressing like girls and stuff. Motley Crue and Poison and these guys. But when grunge came and they were like down and dirty and funky, they made me nervous. I thought, these guys are going to disrespect us. Like, yeah, you're done, buddy. I was so insecure about it that I invited Alice in Chains with their first album when they had Man in the Box to open for Van Halen. They came out on the tour with us, and I've been dear friends with Jerry Cantrell since then. But that's how insecure I was. I said, let's get them on the show. That way their fans will know we're cool. It came out of fear a little bit. not bad fear, but nervousness. They did really good, and business was good, and I made a friend out of it. Jerry comes to Cabo for my birthday bash every freaking year." End quote. On another occasion, Sammy Hagar once said the following to the Seattle Post as to his rationale for bringing Alice in Chains on tour with Van Halen. Quote, "I said, let's find a cool new band that needs exposure. I was watching MTV and saw Man in the Box's video. LAYNE STALEY is one of the greatest new singers today." End quote. Now, as mentioned earlier, Jim Elmer, LAYNE STALEY's stepfather, once stated that Van Halen played a critical role in Layne wanting to become a musician. What Jim Elmer is referring to is a Van Halen concert he brought Layne to when Layne was a kid. The following is from Jim Elmer. This is from Alice in Chains' The Untold Story. Quote, "That concert was where he really started to like music, I think. We were down in the general seating area, without any seats, so we were down in that mosh pit area. So when things started, I got off to the side. The two neighbor boys who came and Layne were about the same age, and they stayed down there. I stayed down there with them for just a little bit, and even in those days, I was the oldest person down there. Some girl came up with her boyfriend and said, 'You're really great for being down here.' I took that as a compliment, because it was action-packed. It was a great concert. I think they stayed down there for the whole thing." End quote. It wasn't just LAYNE STALEY who grew up an admirer of Van Halen, however. All of the guys in Alice in Chains were fans of Van Halen. When it came to Mike Starr in particular, he even wrote in his senior high school yearbook that one of his dreams was to tour with Van Halen. Well, now that dream had become a reality, and Mike was elated. According to his friend Ken Kramer, Mike once called him and said the following, quote, "Dude, I can't talk very long. I have this girl's cell phone and I'm in the bathroom. We're about to open for Van Halen. Man, I love you so much. I wanted to call you. I want you to be here. This is so great. I wanted to share it with you. I'm going to try and call everybody I know." End quote. The Van Halen tour was a big moment for Alice in Chains, and in a way brought things full circle for the band. Unfortunately, it's also believed that it was during this tour when LAYNE STALEY started dabbling with heroin. Now, before I go any further, something needs to be made clear. Though Layne is believed to have started using heroin during the tour, it doesn't mean he started using heroin because of the tour. This is an important distinction to make because Layne's heroin use and the Van Halen tour may have been coincidental. Van Halen may have had nothing at all to do with heroin entering Layne's life. As a matter of fact, no source that I have looked into has ever said that Van Halen got Layne involved with heroin. So, how exactly did heroin enter Layne's life? To this day, there is no definitive answer. No one definitively knows. However, the person that is often pointed to as the person who introduced Layne to heroin is Demry Perreault, LAYNE STALEY's longtime on-again, off-again girlfriend. Now, to be fair, there are those who have defended Demry and have said that she did not introduce Layne to heroin, but rather that it was Layne who introduced her to heroin. Though there is no 100% consensus, most people who have spoken on the topic publicly have said it was Demry who introduced Layne to the drug. Regardless of who introduced who, another big question is when. When did Layne start using heroin? According to Johnny Bacolis, a close friend of Layne's, LAYNE STALEY told him that he started using heroin during the Van Halen tour. The following is from Alice in Chains' The Untold Story. Quote, Bacolis asked Layne how his heroin use began. He recalls Layne telling him they ran out of cocaine and Demry went out looking for more, but instead came back with heroin. This, Bacolis says, is his best recollection of when and how Layne first tried heroin, as told to him by Layne himself. Regarding Demry's use, Bacolis said, "I think she was using at that point on and off. I don't know how seriously she was using, but she was using enough to take it when someone gave it to her." End quote. If this story is true, and if Layne did start using heroin during the Van Halen tour, that would mean the story Johnny Bacolis is telling about Demry getting Layne heroin must have happened at some point between August of 91 to January of 92, the period of time Alice in Chains was touring with Van Halen. Dave Jordan, the man who produced Alice in Chains' first two records, Facelift and Dirt, has said that Layne was not using heroin during the making of Facelift, which was recorded from various points between December of 89 and April of 1990. Dirt, which was recorded between April to July of 92, well after the Van Halen tour, was a different story. Dave Jordan once recalled the following to journalist David DeSola, quote, I went to Arizona and saw them play with Van Halen. Layne was definitely acting different at that point. Layne did coke, and he drank a lot, so I didn't know if he was drunk or whatever, but he wasn't the same. Layne was usually gregarious and cracking jokes all the time. I went to their tour bus before the concert, and Layne was really quiet. I didn't know what was up with him. He is the only one, besides Mike Starr later of course, to try heroin. Jerry never did heroin, neither did Sean." End quote.